Hey, welcome to the first conversation with Carson. I wasn't going to start a podcast, but then I had to do an interview for school, and I thought it might as well be an opportunity to start it. So I'm doing an interview with Dr. Barry Callen. He's a distinguished scholar and author whose profound insights into Christian theology have enriched academic and religious communities alike. Renowned for his meticulous research and eloquent writing, Dr. Callen has devoted his career to exploring the depths of religious thought, ethics, and the practical applications of faith in everyday life. His scholarly work is characterized by its clarity and depth, has not only facilitated a deeper understanding of Christian doctrine, but has also bridged the often complex gap between theological theory and practical spirituality. Through his numerous publications, Dr. Callen has emerged as a guiding light for students, educators, and laypersons seeking to navigate the rich landscapes of Christian theology with both grace and intellectual rigor. Dr. Barry L. Callen is a prolific author who has contributed significantly to Christian studies through his extensive writing. He has authored dozens of books that delve into various aspects of spirituality and theology. Some notable works include Authentic Spirituality, Catch Your Breath, Discerning the Divine, Approaching Theology, and God is Love and Grace. These works collectively explore the nuance of Christian faith, offering insight into living a spiritually enriched life. Dr. Callen's writings often focus on integrating deep theological concepts with practical application, helping readers navigate their spiritual journeys with greater understanding and commitment. His works are particularly respected in the fields of Wesleyan theology and Christian ethics, providing valuable resources for both scholars and lay leaders interested in deepening their understanding of Christian doctrine and practices. I talked to Dr. Callen about D.S. Warner, who I'm writing a paper on for my Christian history class. So it was a good conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, what is your role at Anderson?
I was on the faculty of Anderson University for 40 years, and I was dean, vice president for academic affairs for 18. And now I'm officially retired. Just
Okay.
finished reading the biography of the current president, who was the former deputy director of the
Oh, I
FBI.
did see that. I saw that when I was going through some of your material. That was the big thing out just recently, right?
That's very recently. In fact, I just arranged for 25 copies of that book he's taking with him on a trip to India.
Oh, wow.
And the book is already translated into Romanian for a lot of his friends in that country, and it's quite an international thing. John's a special man, and
Wow. Okay.
that's the third of the presidents of the university whose biographies I've written.
Really?
Yes, and
That's
I've
incredible.
written a number of other biographies also, and the history of the university, and the history of all of our higher ed institutions in North America, etc.
Yeah. Wow. Do you have anything in the works right now after that's done? Or are you taking a break?
I have a lot of things in the works. What's coming off the press next month will be a biography I've done of Kevin Manoia, a former bishop of the Free Methodist Church, president of the National Association of Evangelicals, and many other things. Oh, yes. My wife says that for me, writing is a sickness, and I don't have the ability to not do it. So I'm,
Yeah.
I'm pursuing my
It's
sickness and doing it.
Jeremiah says what, it's shut up in your bones or something,
There
right?
you go. Well, my bones are busting all over the place. I've been
Very
very
good.
privileged. I've got 65 books on Amazon right now, and some of them are 400 or 500 pages long.
Yeah, I meant to grab this is what was the one that you did your I read your pamphlet and that on the 10.
Yes.
That was you kind of took that from your book you wrote previously,
I
correct?
think so. Yes, his biography, "It's God's Church,"
It's
is
God's Church. That's what it
a
was. Yeah.
serious historical work, and then this one is simply an attempt to say to pastors today, um, we have a historical figure here, but with all the changes, what could we say about his current relevance to your people? And I was trying to do that in a very simple, inexpensive way with a top
It
10.
was a great introduction to the highlights, of some of what we are looking at in Warner. I grew up Church of God. I went to Warner University, graduated there with a church ministry degree and a transformational Christian ministry degree. And so I was obviously familiar with, I thought I was familiar. Let me say it that way. I thought I was familiar. So tell me if this is something that you've heard before. I was told that D.S. Warner met with someone in the middle of a field and that they ordained each other. And I don't know where that came from. And I don't know why I thought that.
I have heard that.
What was that?
I would presume that may be true because he stepped outside of denominationalism and therefore ordination wasn't available to him through any normal channel. In fact, ordination in the Church of God clear up into the 1940s was a very informal affair. Anderson College, for instance, when it would graduate a class, often the next day would have a separate ceremony and would select a few from that class they thought were outstanding ministerial credentialed people, and they would ordain them.
Wow.
No other process. And in fact, a formalized process really has not evolved until recent years.
Yeah, I had gone through it right before they updated it recently. I was ordained, I think, with the Church of God in, I want to say 2011 or 12, when I was with the Church of God. So, and then they improved it because it was a mess. It was very messy
process. I'm the editor of the National Credentials Manual for the General Assembly. And yes, it was only in 1917 that the manual was really formalized and expected to be used equally by all assemblies. And leadership focus has matured a great deal in recent years, the process.
Yeah.
Lynn is greatly responsible for developing that program well. Jeanette and I grew up as kids in the same church in Newton Falls, Northeastern Ohio, years ago.
Oh, okay. Newton Falls. Yeah, is that 44444?
That's exactly what it is. That's right. That's its call to fame.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's where our campground is too. I think I grew up going to Northeast Berlin campground.
Berlin Center. That's right. I grew up as a kid
Berlin Center,
Craig Beach on Lake Milton, just 7 or 8 miles from this ground.
Okay.
So
yeah,
that's my home territory.
They would take the youth group there for the camp meeting. No way. Yeah. That's awesome. I pastored in Ravenna for a while, so right in that area.
Fred Harting used to be a pastor at Ravenna. He's retired now. We're in the same choir here in Anderson.
Oh, okay. Philip Miller
would know the name of Fred Harting.
I didn't know his name. I was there for 18 months. Philip Miller was the lead pastor there when I was there.
Okay, Fred, back just a little farther than that. Yes.
Okay.
Of course, I grew up under Lily McCutcheon in Newton Falls, and in honor of her, then later I've written her biography. She Came Preaching, which is the full story of her life and ministry and of the Newton Falls Church from its beginning to her death in 1999.
So going back to the ordination process, how do you think Warner would feel about kind of the way it is now versus what it was?
That's an interesting question. I would suppose he would have mixed feelings. Clearly would have sympathy with serious preparation for ministry, especially serious biblical study.
Yeah, you mentioned something about that he struggled with something.
Well, his own process of being a reformer was stimulated by the fact that his ordination was revoked by his denomination, which made him extremely cautious about church domination of the life of the Spirit. And in that sense, he would be hesitant to know, are you trying to screen and dominate the Spirit here? What are you doing with these human papers? So in one sense, he would be affirmative. In another sense, he'd be very cautious.
Yeah, he said he had I think it was I read the sketch of a life of D.S. Warner yesterday,
Yes.
as well as yours. And he was a relief. There was a relief almost when he left. So there was the old Church of God. So this was confusing me. I didn't know the Church of God that he left, right?
That's the
Was
Church
that
of God Weinburnerian.
okay? Is that around still?
It is still around. Findlay, Ohio. They have a small seminary there. Actually, John Weinbrenner's writing in the early 1800s is what Warner finally first encountered and felt that that was really a good presentation of Christian faith. And so he found his way into this little Weinburnerian denomination, and in fact was then a part of the West Ohio Fellowship of that denomination, and that's the body that stripped him of his credentials because he had become active with Holiness
The
Revival,
holiness.
which had not been a part of their tradition, and they were cautious about it, and he was extremely uncautious about it, and they felt that he was starting to really disrupt church life. So it's ironic that we've said that our basic role is to promote holiness and unity. We came into being credentialed because of holiness preaching, and now
Yeah.
we don't do much of it, ironically.
Yeah. So he got involved. He doesn't seem like the type of person that did things without intense prayer and thoughtfulness. So when he talked about going into the holiness movement, there was this idea of asking for sanctification and this request, like do you know what I'm talking about? The desire for sanctification. He was struggling with it or something like that.
Yes, and then of course the problem he ran into was that the holiness movement of the late 19th century was aimed at one thing, and that was to revive holiness preaching and living within the Wesleyan denominations, because that's where it had resided, and there was this perception that it had gone cold and being neglected. So they started the camp meetings and whatever, but their assumption was we don't want people involved who are the disgruntles of their home denominations, because we want them to get reinvigorated and then have the open door to go home and reinvest that enthusiasm in reviving their denominations. That's where Warner got in trouble, because he had been separated from a denomination and he got disgusted with all denominations. And so he came to the holiness movement with a little broader vision. And that was holiness should not be thought of as the full maturation of discipleship in individual believers, but the church itself had lost its holiness because of its disunity. And holiness also had to be a reformation of the church itself. And therefore, he went to like the Indiana Association of the Holiness People as a speaker and got up and said, by the way, you require credentials in a good denomination to be a part of this. I'm proud of the fact that I have no credentials. I've been stripped of them. I don't want credentials. He said, but sorry, but we don't want people like you because you're just disgruntled and you have nowhere to go home and carry this message. There is no home. And so he separated himself even from the holiness movement because he had a bigger vision of holiness than did they.
Yes. Okay. Now you said that I think it was number 8. He used his gifts well. You said he could inspire but not organize. What were some of the examples in your mind when you wrote that? What were you thinking?
He had the advantage of being a pioneer reformer. So he had nothing to defend. He was simply critiquing
Mm.
everything and everybody else for its downsides, but he didn't have anything to defend. He wasn't representing an established church body of any kind, nor was he trying to form one, because one of his assumptions was that Christ would be returning soon, and the bride of Christ had to prepare herself for his coming. And therefore, why worry even about trying to organize anything? Organizing is the problem.
Mm. Okay.
Churches have gotten over organized and becoming destructive with their human denomination.
So it's not that he couldn't, it's just that he didn't choose to.
We really don't know whether he could have.
Okay.
That just wasn't his focus or his ministry, and probably not his personality. So that, but people didn't know. So when he died in 1895, there was a strong concern that this might be the end of the movement. I mean, if Brother Warner is dead, he is our man.
Yeah.
And yet that was not the case, because they had started a publication, the Gospel Trumpet. And then you get somebody like Enoch Byram, who steps in to run the publishing plant. And he seemed to be very different than Warner in gifting. He was an organizer, a builder.
Mm.
He was actively about that process. Warner was not ever about such a process. Whether he could have been, we don't know.
Yeah.
But he never attempted that. Don't know. But he did use well the gifts that he had, which was really an enthusiastic reformer.
Yeah. So did he really have a wrestling match in the middle of a sermon?
Wait a minute. Tell me that reference.
It was in it said that he was preaching and
Yes.
someone stood up and was arguing about his doctrine. I think it was maybe about the holiness thing, and then he called him scrawny.
No.
And he went down, they wrestled, he took him outside and then went back to preaching, and the guy walks back in and sits down quietly.
There were several examples of that kind of happening, because his enthusiasm caused a lot of tomato throwing at him. It was very nasty stuff. And in fact, once he was in Mississippi and he was doing something that was very unpopular, and that is that he was attracting blacks to his evangelistic services, and he was totally comfortable with that. And some whites disrupted the service with horses and whatever, and he was beaten on that occasion and was taken to a mountain cabin in the woods by a dear person who nursed him back to health. He had been beaten rather badly. And one of Warner...
Well, but there was a story about him leaving in a dress one time, right?
Leaving what?
He put a dress on in a dress. He snuck off in a dress.
Yes, there's that story, and that presumably that did happen. But when he was recovering from that beating, he was a poet, quite the poet, and a songwriter. Who Will Suffer with the Savior is a hymn in a lot of the old Church God hymnals. He wrote that poem while he was recovering in that Mississippi cabin from quite the beating. And that subject was racism, which he did not see the appropriateness of calling for holiness and restricting people of color from coming. That seemed to him totally nonsensical. But
well, he joined the Civil War on his own, basically, for his brother. He stepped in for his brother.
He stepped in for his brother. That's right. But he served only a brief time and wound up with probably pneumonia, and he nearly died. And he got home.
Well, he went in, and it ended in a month. So I mean, you might just say he ended the Civil War. You know?
Okay, all on his own. That's amazing.
What was the name of that hymn again? How to Suffer with My Savior?
I said it before now. Who Who will suffer with the Savior? And look at that up. Beautiful language, but it's uh, you can relate it generally, but if you know the context out of it, I mean, he was talking about real suffering. He's just been beaten by a mob because of his anti-racism in relation to holiness.
Wow.
That was down in Mississippi.
That's, the entire book that I read, the life sketch of D.S. Warner, did not mention one thing about racism, anti-racism, anything like that. So that's interesting.
Well, you get to about
because that seems like something you would bring up.
Well, yeah, there's a famous photograph, I think around 1900, 1905, of the annual gathering of pastors. I believe it was Kansas, and they got them all together on a hillside by a river just to take a photograph. And that photograph's been looked at many times because if those were the ministers at the time, Church of God ministers, about a third of them are white males, and about a third of them are African Americans, and about a third of them are female.
It's that mixed, like equally
now, that
mixed.
would be the kind of mix that would say something about the egalitarianism of the early movement, that they were very open to women in ministry, to mixed races in ministry, that these lines were purely human and were not to be recognized in the life of the Spirit.
It seemed like early on, I think even maybe while he was in college, the first time at Oberlin, which I used to live right on the same road as that college, out in Amherst. Route 58 runs pretty big run there, but it seemed like he could is it?
Well, Oberlin?
I've not been in there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they've got a beautiful conservatory of music. In fact, I was on the campus once trying to do a little research on Warner for that book, and I noticed a little old brick building in the midst of a beautiful new buildings that I think it was called Warner Hall, and I was kind of shocked because he had not gone there very much, and I finally
it was like 6 months or something.
Finally found the archivist and said, "Is that Daniel Warner? I can't believe this." And he said, "Oh, no, that was another Warner that gave us a lot of money." Okay. In fact, would you like to, well, there are backstories. Would you like a backstory on that one?
Yeah.
Warner, as I was told, was an industrialist in New England, and the big factory that he ran made primarily women's corsets. And at the time, there are famous little things in the Gospel Trumpet actively preaching against women, holy women, wearing corsets. Because if you put one on and get yourself all laced up tight, number one, you're guilty of the sin of hypocrisy. You're also lying to the public because you're showing a contour that really isn't you. And thirdly, there's a famous little sketch in the Gospel Trumpet of the insides of a female, just a hand sketch, of the liver jammed up against the heart with the lungs collapsed over the heart, saying, "You do this, you are destroying the temple of the Holy Spirit by ruining your, So we were preaching against corsets, and then here's Warner at Oberlin, at least a Warner, gave a bunch of corset profit money to the holiness movement. And Oberlin was very, very upfront in the holiness movement for a while. Just a humorous side.
That's wild. That's wild.
Were you against it? Or, well, yeah, but we're not against using the prophets.
No.
Okay.
That's might be some hypocrisy in that somewhere as well, huh?
Nothing in Northeast Ohio would ever be done like that, but
right. No, never. So he talked about the 2 acts of grace. What I was getting to. So he was able to preach at a lot of different denominations early on. Is that right? What was it about his message that anyone would let him in?
Most of them did not let him in.
Oh, okay.
What was happening often was that he would set up a meeting in a local schoolhouse or a courthouse or anything, or even a field, and set up a tent or whatever. So many people from many denominations became involved in his preaching, but normally he wasn't being formally invited by denominations, because part of his speech
Okay.
would be anti-denomination, which is hardly popular at the time, certainly. Um, so yeah, right. Not all kinds of denominations inviting him to come in and preach. Um, he would just gather folks. Again,
Was he debating against other pastors? It sounded like there were some debates occasionally.
He wasn't the great debater. He was the great preacher. H.M. Riggle was the debater.
Okay.
And you have, what was it? The Riggle-Kessler debates. There's one whole book on these two guys debating. So yes, it was a time of formal debates. This wasn't unusual at all, but Warner not so much.
Okay.
But he had a colleague or two who was pretty good at it. Warner was too busy proclaiming to give anybody time to argue with him.
I gotcha. So the Gospel Trumpet was clearly the catalyst for the Reformation movement. So some of the things I'm after, I guess, is what does it take to start a movement today? And is there something from Warner that we can grasp in order to do such a thing? I'm a church planter. My heart is church planting and starting new things. So what is it that maybe today would be equivalent? Are we talking blogs, podcasts? I imagine D.S. Warner would probably have a podcast, right? I mean, it seemed like he was, whatever it took to get the message out he was interested in. Is that wrong?
No, that's not wrong. And yes, he probably would, because he was a writer. And when he teamed up with some others, he was a singer. And so it was done by in fact, often music was very important here, because they would come into a town singing and these new Reformation songs, and would gather a crowd through music. And then he would start his bombastic preaching. So music, oh yes, writing, podcasts, I'm sure he would use today, almost any means available. After all, he wound up later in his life getting on a riverboat down on the Ohio River and traveling down the river and stopping preaching at this port and that town and that town. Whatever was available. And
Whatever was available.
available now that he didn't have then, because for him to travel and preach, he did a lot of it for his time and his short life and his health, but he did everything possible.
Mm-hmm.
But he'd do more now, I'm sure, yes. But you have to be dead sure of your message and be crystal clear about it in order to grab attention. And he was that. And again, it's a matter of timing, because you have a lot of upset with denominations. You also did have, right around the turn of the century, 1900, a great optimism in general culture that because of the Industrial Revolution and so forth, we were about to revolutionize our lives. We could create things, we could make progress we'd never made before. You talked about evangelizing the world in this generation. You can get a lot of that from that time period. And so when you start something new, it has to be timely and fit the need of the time and the need of the people being addressed, the sensed needs. You can't just go out cold and just start talking to anybody about anything, because they might not understand you or pay any attention. So it's got to be done timely and in multimedia ways, in whatever. And Warner was really fit for his time. and he used what was available.
Yeah. So do you think, what is it that stalls movements? So you've seen presidents coming in and out of Anderson. You've been kind of in the hotbed of the Church of God. What when does it stall, and what caused it, or has it stalled, or is it still, maybe it's still growing not sure, but movement stall. And so I'm just interested in what is it that stalls movements?
First thing comes to my mind is sociologist Val Clear from Anderson College from years back, who did a whole doctoral dissertation at the University of Chicago on movements, and he goes through several stages of how one gets started and the various phases it goes through until it's pretty well dead, and then out of its corpse another movement starts. He's got that whole sociological pattern. What stalls a movement? The first thing I would say is um, the movement started out of a vision that created excitement. When the people have no vision, you simply have the remnants of a movement. And I would say that's too much where we are now. If you go to the typical Church of God congregation today, anywhere, let's say anywhere in North America, and say to the people, would you write down in one paragraph for me, what is the message of your Church of God movement that's seeking to reform the church worldwide today? Most people would just sit there and stare and wouldn't have an idea what to say. I didn't know we were part of a movement. We're
Right.
called the Church of God movement, and I think I know how we have some work together in the state, and we have some missionaries and so forth. But my focus is here and locally in our town, what we're trying to do in our church. But a movement to impact the church generally, I have no idea. In that sense, we have lost a vision of the movement. We are now simply local and regional elements of a movement that have pretty much institutionalized and are functioning as typical evangelical congregations.
So is it Byram? Is that what you said? Was able to um, take the vision and push it forward, and that's so it took off really under the second tier leadership to a degree.
uh, yes, um, Enoch Byram probably didn't solidify the vision. What he did was solidified the movement institutionally. He built the early Warner Press, survived the Gospel Trumpet, created a board of directors. You know, when you get to H.M. Riggle's book in 1924, Pioneer Evangelism, he makes a devastating statement. And that is that from the point of view of 1924, looking back to the beginnings of the movement, most of the congregations formed by Warner and others in that early evangelism were gone.
Mm.
They didn't survive because they were thrown into being, exciting, and then Warner and the itinerants went on. They didn't leave behind trustees, property, any kind of a structure to maintain. They weren't thinking about that. Get the message out there. Jesus is coming soon. Let's go somewhere else and get it done. And so those people often fizzled
Mm.
because that generation died out. They're getting excited, wore off, and whatever. Um, so we've struggled with that ever since. And that is, how do you stabilize institutionally a movement whose very platform is anti-institutionalism? How do you
Right.
institutionalize a platform of non-institutionalism? Well, we've struggled with that. And we brought a lot
Yeah.
of institutions into being, and they're good ones, but we've done it reluctantly and in a little bit of bad conscience. And I've always said we'll create the institution, but we're going to make sure it never takes over. We don't want to be dominated by any institution. And I'll never forget an Arlo Newell. I don't know if you'd know that name.
No.
Arlo was a beloved pastor in the 60s and 70s and 80s, 1980s, 90s. And then he was elected editor of Warner Press. Came to moved to Anderson, and then he started getting all kinds of criticism. People didn't like this is what he said or this is what he did with the Gospel Trumpet. And he made the comment to me once, Barry, 1 year ago, I was one of the most beloved pastors in the movement. 1 year later, I seem to be the target of all criticism. What changed? One thing, my address. I am now associated with the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I must be cut down to size so that I don't get too much leadership power here. That's part of our DNA, is that, well, we want to emphasize the leadership of the Spirit of God. We now know that to do that well, you also have to do some reasonable institutionalizing to hold it together and propel it forward. But we really don't like the idea of institutionalizing. You know, we start leadership focus that you were a part of early.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that it was in the 1940s that the General Assembly made its first motion to say, we need a program of ordination preparation. We've got so much craziness going on and spontaneity everywhere. We've got to have some kind of regularization here. That was in the 1940s. It wasn't until the 1980s that we got our first credentials manual.
Wow.
It took us 40 years to say, yeah, we all know that's right, but we're not going to do it. And now now we've done it, and well, I don't know.
Is there a successful movement like the Church of God that has come since, as far as Christianity goes? Because it seems like that's a very late, as far as, or I'm not going to call it a denomination, as far as movements go. That seems late for a movement like that to start and be worldwide successful.
Here's what comes to mind, and you can do with this as you want. We had two strong thrusts, early Church of God movement. We need unity in the body of Christ, and it will come through renewed spirit life, holiness.
Mm.
Look at the entire 20th century of Christianity since we began. The entire 20th century. What are the two great movements worldwide within Christianity? You ready? The
Okay.
ecumenical movement. We need unity in the church. Everybody's agreed on that. Now, they haven't agreed on how to get it done, but we've created world councils, national councils, everything imaginable, trying to deal with that. Now, the Church of God movement has stood away from that. Oh, this isn't right. We should stay away from this. This is liberal or whatever. The church got our agenda and was trying to get it done. We got in the background and stayed out of it, except for sniping at people for not doing it right. Okay, number one, movement ecumenical, our platform. Number two, our platform, spirit life, holiness. The other great big movement in the last 20th century has been Pentecostalism worldwide. Exactly the same thing. We have got to champion the presence and the power and the gifting of the Spirit of God. And it has been a powerful worldwide movement. In all denominations, including the Roman Catholic Church, has a strong Pentecostal strike to it in many ways. So the two real big movements in the last century have been our agenda. We were right, but we didn't do anything about it, and we stayed away from it and we're not associated with either one of those because we were afraid it was being done the wrong way.
Yeah.
Of course, it had all kinds of dimensions to it that we may or may not feel good about. But one thing to note, when we were having our centennial in 1980, the National Council of Churches was having a big banquet in New York. And John W.V. Smith, one of my teachers, church historian here in Anderson, went there. Now, he had to almost hide going there because people would criticize him for hanging out with the National Council of Churches. He went there as an observer, and he said to somebody in advance of the big banquet, because I had just, with the seminary, put together this We Believe booklet on the centennial. And he had taken about, I don't know, 500 of them with him. And he said, because we're celebrating our centennial, would it be possible to slip one of these booklets at every place setting in the entire banquet hall? We've got Roman Catholic, Orthodox, every denomination imaginable there. And they said, yeah, I guess that'd be okay. So John did that. And afterwards, he had numerous people come up to me and say, who are you people? I was looking at that book. I never heard of you. Are you a member here? No. This is really fascinating stuff. Why don't you come talk to us about this? Well, we represent Christian unity, and that's what you're doing, but we don't like you because we're not sure if you're doing it right, so we don't want to talk. In fact, I'm going to get in trouble for being here. They just sort of look at him and go, what? That's the strangest double talk I ever heard. Well, that's part of our paradox as a movement. We have set out the right agenda. And in the last century, the church has acknowledged it's the right agenda and has worked at it hard, while we have stayed on the other side of the tracks trying not to get in trouble. Well, I've said enough about that.
No, that's
anywhere you want to go.
That's very interesting. Well, let me ask you a question. This would be one of those questions where if you don't want to answer it, we can just move right on. So yesterday, the Methodists, John Methodist, gender, and they had their split. We had a split, I think, just a year ago. And so we've kind of closed that chapter in the Methodist Church, but it seems like the Church of God is maybe there's a bit of a movement that's starting that kind of discussion in the Church of God. That kind of unity, like where would Warner be with Warner or you, or how does that work with, did he deal with new ideas and different things like that?
It's hard to relate this to Warner because his ministry was so short. He died at 42. He was on a journey. He wasn't getting into these sorts of things. He was just charging, because you don't build anything because Jesus is coming back shortly. You just criticize everything and clean up the bride of Christ and get her ready. That was kind of the agenda. So it's hard.
So did that affect so the gospel on the ground versus kind of a gospel in the air, type thing with Warner? If you're focused more on the personal holiness and the church holiness, is there less communal justice that's happening? Or like, we want to feed these people, we want to clothe these people, the Matthew 25, feed them, give them water, give them shelter, visit them, heal them. Was that a part of?
Well, he didn't.
Because I don't see it a lot, but yeah, go ahead.
No, he didn't do that because that just wasn't the agenda. He talked about the possibility of starting a little school for kids in Grand Junction, Michigan, but didn't get around to that. It wasn't time, and he didn't live long enough. He didn't do anything about systemic racism, other than the fact that he didn't see holiness having any discriminatory lines. And so, in effect, around him, there were social agendas emerging. The freedom of the blacks, the freedom of women, this was just spontaneously happening. He wasn't programming this. He was preaching holiness. And that's just what holiness does. Other people had to get around to institutionalizing and then programming. for things like that. Um, I don't know if I really, you bring up the LGBTQ stuff and so on. Um, the Global Methodist Church that just emerged, um, just for your curiosity, um, they have published a marvelous new hymnal. Blessed be his name. Beautiful hymnal.
Okay.
I was an advisor to that hymnal when it was in development, because they were wanting to reach out to all bodies of holiness Wesleyan people and try to gather the best of everybody into this thing. And they heard we maybe had some songs or something. They weren't sure. There are 14 classic Church of God songs in that new hymnal.
Oh, wow.
There's certainly never in the Methodist hymnal. Well, I made that proposal. I think I proposed 15, and for some reason one of them didn't make it. I don't know, but the bulk of them are there by Naylor and Warner and
13 AS in Alpha, 831.
Sorry, I'm in a hospital. I'm in a hospital, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Alpha,
I'm working at the Cole Eye Clinic, but
number 3.
can I get you out on one last question?
Yeah, I'm not sure I answered that one very well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got.
Number 3.
Okay, so yeah, step back and finish that
I
one.
might
I'm
just
sorry.
say on the LGBTQ thing, again, I'm the editor of the National Credentials Manual, and 2 ministers were just decredentialed because of their active advocacy for this, and church and Chog Affirm on the web. These 2 individuals, of course, are my very personal friends in my local church here. It would be painful because they tried to gather quite a crowd of folks who agree with them, and I don't know what's going to happen. But
Yeah.
that is sort of a little movement inside the movement that is being
Yeah.
actively listed.
Well, and I have some friends, obviously being Methodist now, I have some friends that are a part of that thing. And so it was interesting when I was reading about that, the taking of credentials, with Warner. And I was like, I wonder how he would respond to that, and so what do you think?
Well, he would have been shocked first that the movement he was trying to start would have any kind of an institutionalization that
Right.
could possibly do such a thing. Now, one of the problems with Methodism, if you talk to the global people, is there is so much institutionalization that it drives people nuts. Quite apart from social issues, both reasons they drive people away. And of course, the Methodists right now are in General Conference, and they're in the process of loosening a lot of their standing restrictions on LBG.
Oh, they did. No, they voted yesterday. They removed all of them.
Did they? Well, I know they were in the
Yeah.
process of that. And so the global people say, you see, we told you all the way along. They're totally liberal. They wanted to be that. They were on the books as not being, but we knew they were ignoring all those things. And now, as soon as we get out of there, so we can't vote against it, they're going to liberalize everything. They're saying, told you. Well, you do then have 2 different crowds of people. Now, of course, Methodism has its own problem in this regard because it's a large worldwide movement. And it has one kind of identity in North America. But if you go to most Methodists outside of North America, they would be horrified at what's going on here right now within Methodism, because they'd be totally opposed to that. So you again, this is going to be an ongoing issue for Methodists, and it may become an emerging issue for Church of God that is much more of a conservative body and will resist this strongly as immorality and so unbiblical that we cannot tolerate this. But we're in a culture now that has so accepted it as normal, legal, not an issue, that's working its way into the churches quickly in younger generations. So there's going to be more and more standards.
Yeah, I did a lot of personal work around those issues, and I land differently than the Church of God does, and so that's why I am where I am now.
Okay.
But
yeah,
well,
you know, you land where your conscience is going to take you.
Yes, and that's where we're at now. Let me close with this question.
Yes.
Wesley and Warner, if they met, where would they start their conversation on? Where did they disagree the most?
You know, that's very interesting. I think about Howard Snyder's book on the radical Wesley that I've used a number of times. Good friend of mine. You know, I think they would have a lot in common. They were trying to do the same thing. Wesley was doing it to the point that he was accused of being an enthusiast. You're just breaking church rules and you're just compounding this holiness all over the place. The difference, he and Warner, I think, would be really together there. Where they would be apart is that Warner suddenly decided the problem is this human institutionalizing the church, and we're getting out of this. Wesley said it's over institutionalized, and I hate this, but I'm going to have to get separate from it some. And yet I don't want to leave it because I see great value in it. So he was an Anglican who became a non-Anglican who never wanted to not be an Anglican. And well, see, I've been the editor of the Wesleyan Theological Journal for a quarter of a century. So, you know, I know the Wesley stuff very well. And I think it's very interesting. Get Howard Snyder's book on the radical Wesley. And I think you would see there many commonalities. And yet the one was that Warner really got so disabused of church institutionalism that he simply throw it out and he didn't even look back. Wesley never wanted to throw it out and always looked back because he was a highly disciplined, institutional, appreciative man, as long as it wasn't getting in the way of the spirit. And it's still that difficult paradox that has to be judged all the time. And it is judged differently by different people.
Absolutely.
By the way, God bless you, brother, and whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And anybody from Connecticut, and you know that if you ministered in Northeast Ohio, you're from Connecticut. You know that. Northeast Ohio was Connecticut forever.
Okay.
Did you know that?
No, this is new. You're telling me new stuff. What do you mean?
The British colony of Connecticut, its only parameters were north and south, longitude, latitude, but to the west, it was to the Pacific. They didn't know where it would end.
Yeah.
And when Pennsylvania became a state, it wanted that big strip of Connecticut that's now the northern strip of Pennsylvania. And they made a deal with Connecticut that they could have it if Pennsylvania would allow a chunk of woods to the west of Pennsylvania to stay there for Connecticut in order for them to have a place to send their disgruntles or whatever who weren't working out on the East Coast. So Northeast Ohio is the western colony of Connecticut.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
No, this is new for me. That's
a weird, sorry, it's just a weird part of American history. I have junk like that in my head. You need to.
Yeah, I enjoy Northeast Ohio. I still consider myself a Church of God kid, you know, and I've still got a lot of friends and all that stuff. So I'll look forward. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for doing this. And
you're welcome. You're welcome, and God bless you and what you're doing.
All right. God bless you too. You have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Good to be with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.